shadows on Main Street. By the time the bus rolled into town, Ethan's back ached, his right leg had gone numb, and the coffee in the paper cup he was holding had turned cold and bitter. Outside the scratched window, his hometown slid into view like an old photograph someone had left too long in the sun. Faded, softened, familiar even through the blur. The sign at the edge of town still read, "Welcome to Mapleford, home of the Fighting Hawks." Somebody had painted a crooked, smiley face in yellow over the last word. Ethan almost laughed. Almost. He stepped off the bus with his duffel bag over one shoulder, and the air hit him, damp, a little sweet, with a hint of fried food from somewhere down the road. It smelled like his teenage years, like summer nights and forgotten plans. The bus hissed, groaned, and pulled away. For a moment, he just stood there, watching it shrink into the distance, the sound of its engine fading down the highway. When it finally disappeared, everything went quiet. Too quiet. He shifted the duffel on his shoulder and started walking. Main Street hadn't grown up much since he'd left. Same brick buildings, same narrow sidewalks, same crooked telephone poles leaning like they were tired too. The hardware store still had plastic lawn chairs out front. The diner still had the neon sign in the window. Open 6 a.m. Midnight. Though a few of the letters flickered now. He passed the barber shop where he'd gotten his first real haircut and the thrift store where his mom used to buy winter coats. Half the shops had new names. Coffee place instead of a laundromat. Some craft store where the old video rental used to be. But the bones were the same. People glanced at him. Some curious, some distant. Some doing that small town thing of pretending not to stare while obviously staring. A woman with a stroller slowed and smiled politely. A man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store gave him a nod. Ethan nodded back. His chest felt tight. On the corner of Main and Willow, he stopped. There it was, Tony's Diner, blue awning a little more faded, but still standing. The bell above the door gave a familiar jingle when he pushed it open, and the smell hit him. Coffee, bacon, something sweet on the griddle. For a second, his vision wavered. A memory stepped in front of the present. Him at 17, sliding into a booth with his baseball teammates, laughter too loud, fries piled in the middle of the table. His dad sitting at the counter, nodding at him in that proud, silent way. The image flickered, then disappeared. "Sit anywhere you like," a voice called. Ethan blinked and saw her. Mia. She was behind the counter, hair pulled back in a messy bun, a pencil stuck through it. A little older, sure, but her eyes were the same. Dark, bright, curious. She was filling sugar dispensers and didn't look up at first. He took a seat at the counter, took off his cap, waited. When she finally turned, the smile on her face was automatic, the way you smile at any stranger walking in off the street. Then she really looked at him. The sugar packet slipped from her hand and hit the floor. "Ethan," he swallowed. His throat was suddenly dry. "Hey, Mia." She stared for a beat longer, like her brain was trying to line up the boy she'd known with the man in front of her. Shorter hair, deeper lines around the eyes, a faint scar running from his temple into his hairline. And then she came around the counter and hugged him. It caught him off guard. His body tensed before he could stop it, instincts flaring. For half a second he was somewhere else. Different heat, different smells, a shout in another language. Then he felt her arms, warm and steady, and forced himself to breathe. She pulled back, hands still on his shoulders. "You're here," she said. like it was the most unbelievable thing in the world. "You're actually here." "Yeah," he said. "Guess I am." "When? How? Why didn't you tell anyone you were coming?" He shrugged. "Didn't know I was until I did. Got out 3 weeks ago. The bus came this way. Seemed as good a place as any to get off." Something flickered across her face. Sympathy, or maybe understanding. "Sit. I'm making you pancakes. No arguments." "You don't even know if I want pancakes." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you want pancakes?" He paused. Yeah, I do." "Thought so." She went back behind the counter, calling something to the cook through the pass window. Ethan sat there, listening to the clatter of plates, the hiss from the grill, the low murmur of two guys in a corner booth arguing about football. It was all so normal. Like the years between then and now had been a dream he woke from on the bus. Mia returned with a mug of coffee and set it in front of him. "So," she said, leaning on her elbows across from him. "You back for good?" He stared at the swirling surface of the coffee for a second. Back for good. The words felt heavy, permanent. "Honestly? I don't know." Chapter 2. His mother's house sat on the same quiet street, 2 turns off Main. The grass was a little overgrown, the paint on the porch railing chipped, but the wind chime still hung by the front door, the same metal leaves and tiny birds. He pushed the gate open, and it squeaked exactly the same way it had when he was 10. Mom wasn't home. She was at work at the clinic, a neighbor said. But her eyes lit up when she saw him standing on the doorstep. There were hugs and tears, and too many "you look good" and "I'm fine" and "I missed you" stacked on top of each other like dishes in a sink. Later, when she went to get ready for her night shift, he stood in his old room. The posters were gone, but the faint outlines remained on the walls, rectangles of less faded paint. The bed was the same, only now it creaked under his weight in a way it hadn't when he was a kid. The window looked out on the same maple tree, its branches thicker, higher. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the marks on the doorframe, pencil lines and dates where his mother had measured his height. The last one was from the summer before he left for basic training. He reached up and touched it, fingers resting on the thin groove. "Still taller than the doorway," he muttered to himself. "Not by much." His mom's voice came from behind him. He turned. She leaned in the doorway, holding a laundry basket. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He opened his mouth to say, "Yeah, I'm fine." The automatic answer, the easy one. Instead, something looser came out. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Being back, not that." Her eyes softened. She set the basket down and crossed the room, sitting beside him. "You don't have to know yet," she said. "You just have to be here. One day at a time." He looked at her hands, smaller than his, calloused from years at the clinic, steady. He thought of all the times he'd been patched up by strangers in sterile tents, and how different this felt. "I don't want you to worry all the time," he said. She gave a tired little laugh. "I'm your mother. That's my default setting." He smiled despite himself. "Just promise me something," she added. "What's that?" "When it gets loud up here," she tapped her temple, "you don't try to handle it alone, okay?" He hesitated. "I'm used to handling things alone." "I know," she said. "That's what scares me." The room went quiet. A car passed outside, the faint hum fading into the distance. "Okay," he said at last. "I'll try." It wasn't a big promise, but it was more than nothing. Chapter 3. Days fell into a rhythm, strange and uneven at first, then slightly smoother. Ethan helped with little things around the house, fixing the gutter, raking the yard, changing a leaky faucet that had annoyed his mother for months. Physical tasks were easier. They made sense. Problem, tools, solution. The rest was more complicated. He slept lightly. Sometimes the slam of a car door outside would jolt him awake, heart racing, hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. He'd lie there in the dark, listening to the soft tick of the old clock in the hallway, reminding himself, "You're home. It's just Mapleford. It's just some kid's car. You're home." Most mornings, he ended up at Tony's diner. "Thought you might become a regular," Mia said after the third day in a row. "I'm a man of habit," he replied. "Oh, really? Since when?" He thought of the endless routines of deployment. Wake up, gear check, roll call, patrol, every day mapped, still full of unknowns. "Long story," he said. "Good," she said. "I like stories." Sometimes she worked the morning shift, sometimes the evening. On days when the diner was quiet, she'd slide into the seat across from him for a few minutes, nursing her own coffee. She told him about town gossip, about how the old movie theater was now some kind of yoga and pottery studio. Don't even ask me how that works. And how Coach Daniels had finally retired and moved to Florida, where he was probably still yelling at teenagers about focus and discipline on some beach somewhere. In return, Ethan offered fragments. Not the worst pieces, not the images that woke him up at night drenched in sweat. Just small bits. "The food was better than you think," he said once when she asked about overseas. "Sometimes, when it showed up at all. Or, you learn to notice weird things, like the way the air smells before. Stuff happens. The silence. How even birds get quiet." She listened without interrupting, her eyes steady on his face. No pity, no forced cheerfulness. Just presence. It helped more than he expected. Chapter 4. One Thursday afternoon, the diner's bell rang, and in walked a man in a faded baseball cap and a jacket with an American flag patch on the sleeve. Ethan almost didn't recognize him. "Lucas?" he said, half standing. The man squinted, then grinned. "Holy Ethan! Ethan Miller!" They clasped hands, then pulled each other into one of those brief, hard hugs men give when they're not sure if they're allowed to actually hug. Lucas had been a grade above Ethan in school. They'd played ball together in the summers. Lanky, always laughing, fast as hell in the outfield. Now he carried more weight around the middle, a beard and a limp that couldn't be hidden no matter how he tried to walk normal. "Back from the sandbox, huh?" Lucas said, sliding onto the stool next to him. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Heard you?" He glanced pointedly at Lucas's leg. "Afghanistan," Lucas said. "Roadside surprise 2 tours ago. Got the early retirement package, if you can call it that." He tapped his knee. "Metal where bone used to be. TSA loves me. I'm their favorite." The joke sat unevenly, a little bitter, but Ethan smiled anyway. "How've you been?" Lucas shrugged. "You know, up, down, got a job over at the auto shop. They let me sit when the leg acts up. VA's a pain, but it's something." He glanced at Ethan. "How about you, man? How's your head?" It was such a blunt question that Ethan almost laughed. Most people danced around it, circling with phrases like, "How are you adjusting?" or "Must be weird, huh?" "My head is complicated," Ethan said finally. "Aren't they all?" Lucas signaled to Mia, who had been watching with open curiosity. "Hey, can we get 2 cheeseburgers, fries, and whatever hero special this guy's been living on?" "Black coffee and pancakes," she said, smirking at Ethan. Again. Living dangerously, I see, Lucas teased. They ate, talked, let old memories surface, games they'd played, stupid things they'd done, teachers they'd driven crazy. Every now and then, the conversation veered back to the present, to doctors, meds, nightmares, good days, bad days. At one point, Lucas said quietly, "You going to the group?" "What group?" "Vet support thing. They meet Tuesdays over at the community center. Couple of us from town, some older guys from earlier wars. We sit in folding chairs, drink terrible coffee, and try not to pretend everything's fine." Ethan picked at a fry. "I don't know if that's my thing." "I said the same," Lucas replied. "First time I went, I sat near the exit, so if it got too weird, I could bolt. Didn't." He shrugged. "Seeing other people say out loud some of the stuff in my brain doesn't fix it, but it's less lonely." Ethan stared at the ketchup bottle, at his hands, at the faint tremor that came when he got tired and hadn't eaten enough. "I'll think about it," he said. "Good enough," Lucas replied. "We're there if you do. First room on the left. Cheesy poster on the door that says, 'You are not alone.' It's corny as hell. Still true." Chapter 5. He didn't go that Tuesday. He walked past the community center. Twice. He stood outside, hands in his jacket pockets, the autumn wind tugging at his sleeves. Through the window, he could see fluorescent lights, a bulletin board with too many flyers, a glimpse of someone in a wheelchair rolling by. He heard laughter. Not loud, not sharp, just a low ripple. The idea of walking in, of all those eyes turning toward him, of having to say his name and where he'd been. His chest clenched. He kept walking. Later that night, lying in his old bed, he stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around him. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A car door closed. Someone's TV murmured from next door. He imagined a circle of folding chairs in a room that smelled like old coffee and dust. Imagined men and women with stories stitched under their skin like his. Imagined saying nothing the first time, just listening. "It's not like you're doing much else," he muttered to himself. The next week, he went. He stood in front of the door with the cheesy poster, "You are not alone," in big blue letters, and felt like a teenager about to walk into a room where he didn't know anyone. Then he thought of his mother's face when she'd touched her temple, thought of Mia's steady gaze, thought of Lucas tapping his metal knee and making jokes. He took a breath, opened the door. Chapter 6. Walking into the room didn't fix anything. Of course it didn't. There was no magic switch, no cinematic moment of healing, but it did something. Someone handed him a styrofoam cup of coffee. Someone else moved a chair to make space. A guy with a gray ponytail and a Vietnam vet hat nodded at him like he'd been expecting him all along. They went around the circle, first names only if you wanted. Some people gave more, some didn't. When it was his turn, his throat closed up. "I'm Ethan," he managed. "Army, back a few weeks." He felt every eye on him, every breath in the room. "Welcome, Ethan," the group said, almost in unison. It was such a small thing, almost silly, but it loosened something in his chest. He didn't talk much that first night. He listened. An older woman talked about waking up at every noise after Desert Storm. A younger guy talked about feeling guilty buying groceries while people from his unit were still deployed. Lucas joked about his leg, then admitted he'd once sat in his car outside the grocery store for 20 minutes because he couldn't make himself go inside. They talked about meds, about anger, about the weirdness of coming home and feeling like a stranger in the same grocery aisle where they used to beg their parents for cereal. They laughed more than he expected. When he left, the air outside felt cleaner somehow. On the walk home, he stopped at a crosswalk and watched a group of teenagers bike past, laughing, their backpacks bouncing. Sunlight slanted over the roofs, turning the bricks warm. The world looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but something in him was half a degree different. Chapter 7. Weeks turned into months. He started helping Lucas at the auto shop a couple days a week. At first it was just sweeping the floor, moving parts, handing tools. They didn't put him on the books yet. Just cash in hand, a start. He liked the work. Engines had logic. If something rattled, there was a reason. If something leaked, you could find it. Some days his leg ached where shrapnel had left its mark. Some days his head ached from memories sneaking up on him, a particular smell, a backfiring truck, a slammed door. Other days were almost good. He and Mia found a familiar orbit. Some evenings, when the dinner rush died down, they'd sit in a booth with pie and coffee, legs stretched out, shoulders relaxed. Conversation drifted from silly, local gossip, internet nonsense, to surprisingly deep. One night, she traced the rim of her mug with her finger and said, "You know, I always thought I'd leave this town, move to a big city, get an apartment with terrible plumbing and a view of anything else." "What stopped you?" he asked. She shrugged. "My dad got sick. Then he got better, but by then Mom needed help with the place. This job was here. Life just sort of kept happening. And I didn't want to be the one to break everything apart just because I was restless." "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Some days," she said. "Other days I think, maybe we put too much pressure on the idea of leaving, like staying means failing. But there's courage in staying too, in caring about a place long enough to see it change." He thought about that, about how he'd left at 19, convinced that the only way to be someone was to get as far from Mapleford as possible, about how he'd ended up back here, not as the conquering hero he'd once imagined, but as a man carrying shadows he couldn't easily put down. "You're different," she said suddenly. He shifted. "Yeah, well, war'll do that." She shook her head. "Not just that, I mean, yeah, obviously, but also, you're quieter. Not in a closed-off way. In a more thoughtful way, like you see more details now." "Details keep you alive," he said softly, then realized how that sounded. "Out there, I mean." "Maybe they keep you alive here too," she replied. He met her eyes. There was no judgment there, only a warmth he hadn't known he'd been missing until he felt it. "Thanks," he said. "For what?" "For not pretending I'm the same as before, and not acting like that's a bad thing." She smiled, small but genuine. "I liked you then. I like you now. Different versions. Same person." Chapter 8. One crisp evening, Main Street held its annual Fall Festival. They'd done it every year as far back as he could remember. Booths with caramel apples, kids running around with painted faces, a stage set up near the courthouse where local bands played covers of old rock songs. He almost didn't go. Crowds still made him uneasy. Too many people, too many sounds, too many things he couldn't control. But his mother wanted to see the craft booths, and Mia said she'd be there helping at the pie stand, and Lucas texted, "Come on, man. We'll make fun of the band together." So he went. At first, his senses felt overloaded. Music, chatter, smell of kettle corn and grilled sausages. Kids darted between legs, shrieking. Dogs barked. A balloon popped somewhere and his entire body went rigid before he could stop it. He stepped back, away from the thickest crowd, pretending to be interested in a display of homemade candles. "Hey," a voice said quietly. It was Lucas. "You doing okay?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah, just taking a second." "We can walk the perimeter," Lucas said. "Less crowded." "You can mock people's yard decorations with me." Ethan chuckled. "That your idea of a good time?" "On a Thursday? Absolutely." They did exactly that. Walked the edge of the festival side by side, making snarky comments about wooden scarecrows and glitter pumpkins. With each step, the tension in Ethan's shoulders eased a little. The sounds became background noise instead of a threat. They circled back toward the main stage just as a teenage band started a slightly off-key rendition of an old Springsteen song. The lead singer's voice cracked on the high notes, but the crowd cheered anyway. Mia spotted them and waved from the pie booth. Her apron was dusted with flour, a streak of whipped cream on her cheek. "You look ridiculous," Ethan called, grinning. "You say that like it's a bad thing," she shot back. "Want pie?" "Is that a real question?" Lucas said. They ended up sitting on the tailgate of someone's truck, plates balanced on their knees, the three of them watching the makeshift stage. As the sun dipped, strings of lights came on, casting everything in a warm, soft glow. For a moment, Ethan let himself just be. Not the kid who left, not the soldier, not the man trying to figure out how to breathe in a quiet town. Just a person with friends, eating pie, listening to mediocre music in the middle of Main Street. He caught himself smiling without thinking about it. Mia noticed. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "This is just nice." She bumped her shoulder against his. "Yeah," she said. "It is." Chapter 9. Later that night, after the festival, he walked home alone. The streets were quieter now, the air cooler. His breath puffed out in small clouds. He paused in the middle of Main Street, looking around. At the diner's dark windows, at the hardware store's locked door, at the single traffic light blinking yellow over the intersection. When he'd left Mapleford all those years ago, this street had felt like a tunnel he needed to escape. Too narrow, too small, not enough future in it. Now it felt different. Not bigger exactly, just deeper. Like there were layers he'd never paid attention to before. He thought about all the people in the houses, in their beds, fighting their own quiet battles, regrets, small joys, old griefs, new hopes, not so different from his. The shadows on Main Street weren't just his. He wasn't the only one learning how to walk with them. He turned the corner onto his block and saw the light still on in the living room. His mother must have fallen asleep on the couch again. He'd wake her, send her to bed, turn off the TV, maybe make some tea. Maybe he'd tell her about the festival. Maybe he'd save it for another day. Maybe he'd just say, "Today was good." Because it was. Not perfect, not healed, but good. Weeks later, at the Tuesday group, someone asked him how long he was planning to stay in Mapleford. He thought of the bus, of that first moment when he'd stepped onto the cracked sidewalk and felt like a ghost. He thought of the diner, the auto shop, the community center, the fall festival, and the way Mia's laugh sounded across a crowded room. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I used to think coming back here was temporary. Just a stop in between something else." "And now?" Lucas asked. Ethan looked around the circle, at the lined faces, the tired eyes, the small smiles. "And now," he said slowly, "I think maybe this is part of something else. Maybe I don't have to have it all figured out today." An older man across the circle nodded. "You don't," he said. You just gotta keep showing up. Ethan smiled. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Chapter 10. One evening, he stood outside Tony's diner as the sun went down. The sky over Mapleford blazed orange and pink, the colors caught in the glass windows, reflected in the chrome of parked cars. Mia stepped out, locking the door behind her. Closing time, she said. Want a walk? Sure. They walked down Main Street side by side, not in any hurry. Their footsteps matched without them trying. You remember what you told me back when I first came in? He asked. What's that? You said you weren't sure I'd still be here. She thought, smiled. Yeah. Guess you proved me wrong. Maybe I proved myself wrong, he said. She glanced at him. You planning on sticking around? He exhaled, watching his breath disappear into the cool evening air. I think so, he said. For a while at least. Long enough to stop feeling like a visitor. Good, she said softly. I'm glad you're here, Ethan. He looked at her then, really looked, at the way the fading light caught in her hair, at the gentle tiredness in her eyes that matched his own in some strange way. I'm glad I'm here too, he said. They reached the corner and stopped as the traffic light blinked above them, casting red, then green, then yellow over the quiet street. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was standing between worlds, half in one, half stuck in the other. He was just here, on Main Street, in the only moment that was real. With someone beside him who understood at least part of the story without him having to explain every line. The shadows were still there, of course. They probably always would be. But they no longer felt like something that would swallow him whole. They felt like something he could walk through, maybe even walk with. Slowly, steadily. One step, one conversation, one Tuesday night at a time. And as the last traces of daylight slipped behind the buildings, Ethan Miller, soldier, son, friend, man trying to find his way, took another breath and kept going. If this story resonated with you, even in a small, quiet way, take a moment to share it. Someone out there might need a reminder that healing isn't loud, and home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a feeling we return to when the world gets too heavy. If you know a veteran, reach out. If you are one, you're not walking alone.